work session to order. It's December 10th. For the record, Councilmember Vasquez is attending remotely. Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Greenstein, Councilmember Cox, Councilmember Stedman, and Councilmember Dunning are here present. I also want to acknowledge that we, the City of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Mezin Creek, including the Nisqually Indian Tribe and the Squax Indian Tribe. With that, can I get a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there any nays? Then that motion unanimously carries. We have an approved agenda. And first up on our approved agenda is public comment. We do have one person signed up for public comment. Can you please approach the podium? And you know the drill. Please introduce yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Katrina Stensgaard. I live in the city of Lacey. One of the things that I would like to keep in the forefront of everyone's mind here is veteran services, looking at what we have currently as veteran services, looking at the veteran services, the Lacey Veteran Service Hub model, keeping that institutional knowledge. And also with the challenges of a growing city with city problems, considering the fact that we have a workforce at the base, many of them would like to retire in Lacey. Maybe they're not quite sure what they can do with that next chapter of their life, considering programs like maybe internships in city management or project management, or what are the things that the city of Lacey can be doing to harness that talent and develop it for the greater good.
Great, thank you. And I look forward to talking to you a little bit later and working with you. Is there anyone else wishing to address this council? Seeing none, then next on our agenda is our federal legislation update and our 2025 priorities.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. We are going to be joined here by Joel Rubin and David Hodges in just a second. They're being brought over, and they're going to provide some background on, taking a look at what's going on in the federal environment and then talking about some of our federal priorities moving forward. We've been working with them to create the draft federal legislative priorities that are before you today. I've got another kind of mocked draft that wasn't included in the packet until later today that I just want to pass out for a draft, and we'll continue to refine this. And with that, I will turn it over to Joel Rubin and David Hodges.
Sounds good. Good to see you, Joel. Good to see you, David.
Mayor. Thanks for having us. I'm going to try to share my screen really quick. So, well, thanks for having us today or tonight. I always appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with you all. As Shannon said, I'm David Hodges with CFM and have Joel Rubin here calling in from DC. Joel, I don't know if you want to anything real quick.
Yeah, no, just want to say hi, Mr. Mayor, council members, city manager. Appreciate the opportunity. I wish I was there in person. Got to get out of the Beltway here, but the Congress is wrapping up their work next week, so stuck here and hopefully be out there shortly. So I'll let David get into the meat of the presentation.
Thanks, Joel. So yeah, we're wanted to get into some of your recent successes over the last few years, working with you all. Talk about, as Shannon mentioned, your 2025 draft federal agenda that we've been working with staff on. I'm going to turn it over to Joel at that point and let him talk about election outcomes and then give a quick preview of sort of what we see on the horizon in 2025. So just to kick things off here, recent successes, that top line there, city congressional funding, something I'm always excited to talk about. This is also known as earmarks, practice that had gone away for about 10 years and then returned a few years ago. Just giving us another tool in our toolbox to be able to access funding for city priorities that may not fit into that nice little box of a federal grant. We've had a lot of successes on that. That first item there, Emergency Coordination Center generator, that is yellow. That is currently pending earmark from Congresswoman Strickland for 900,000. Joel will talk a little bit about why that's pending and sort of when we hope that funding will eventually be released. $500,000 for the Vets Hub to do some accessibility enhancements over there. $1 million for the Makerspace expansion, and then $850,000 for College Street Phase 3. So had a lot of successes on the earmark front. We're very excited to continue to build on that. Want to talk a little bit about grant funding too. The Makerspace equipment, that was $1 million actually competitive grant that we coupled with that Makerspace expansion. That really kind of took that makerspace to the next level. Safe Streets for All planning grant, $68,000 for that, bringing total federal funding we've helped you secure in the last couple of years to about $4.3 million. On the earmark front, typically you only get like one of those every couple of years. Since they've been back, we've been successful in getting you one every single year that they have returned. And again, we're hopeful to continue to build on that and bring those successes back to the city for your priority projects. On the legislation front, America Rescue Plan, that was $6.8 million, and flexible funding that you all received early on in the Biden administration. Of course, the bipartisan infrastructure law continues to provide a lot of opportunities for infrastructure dollars. Even as this current administration is winding down, there'll continue to be opportunities in that what was the largest infrastructure investment that this country has made since the creation of the highway system. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, sort of in that vein, a lot of opportunities for green type products or projects and energy efficiency. And then just really quickly want to mention the Puget Sound SOS Act that was finally successful a couple of years ago, that helped create a Puget Sound office within the EPA. Very exciting that finally got over the finish line, and just brings additional resources to help clean up the Puget Sound. Joel, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on recent successes before I
Yeah,
come
the
to
only thing I'd mention is obviously there's a lot of work that goes into each and every one of these project successes. Your congressional delegation has been really real champions in bringing home these federal investments to the city. The Safe Streets for All planning grant is a small number, $68,000, but that could lead to significant construction dollars. You needed that Safe Streets plan before you could go after those Safe Streets construction dollars. So as the city finalizes the plan, then you can go after some of those infrastructure dollars for places like College Street and other safety corridors throughout the community. So just wanted to mention that. But other than that, it's a good summary of what you all have been able to bring back to the city of Lacey. The mayor's done an outstanding job whenever he comes back here, meeting with the congressional offices, and the mayor, deputy mayor who came back last time, meeting with the congressional offices and the agencies to make sure that folks back here understand your priorities, and it's a nice record of success.
Joel. So looking at your 2025 federal agenda that we're been working with staff on to hone, and we'll continue to do that leading into January. Up at the top there, Hunter Mirror Park, $400,000. And again, I should specify this is earmark funding that we're hoping to help with the Civic Plaza there. Still flushing out exactly what we're going to apply for. And again, Joel will talk about when earmark funding opens up again next year, which is a bit of an open question at the moment on timing. But regardless, we think that would be a good project that would be compelling to the congressional delegation. College Street Safety Improvement Project. This is something that we've had on your agenda for several years now. We continue to kind of chip away at it. We've gone for a few rounds of raise grants. That's formerly known as Tiger, formerly known as Build. Have just kind of missed the threshold of getting that over the finish line. With the new administration coming in, we're anticipating a lot of the criteria around raise grants, and they may be called build grants again, is going to change. So definitely when the new administration comes in and we anticipate changes to that program, we'll be looking at how we can frame that project a little differently to appeal to this incoming US DOT administration. The I-5 corridor, I don't want to, I think we all know, are familiar with that. But obviously that continues to be a big priority that we're working with other regional partners to make sure that we're advocating for with the congressional delegation. And then policy priorities, build America, buy America, flexibility. That's something, was implemented, has been a bit of a challenge, as you all well know, I'm sure, for public works projects to adhere to, just in terms of supply chain issues, sometimes really increasing the cost of public works projects if they have federal money in the mix. So that's something we're just asking for flexibility for. It's something that a lot of municipal governments across the country are frankly struggling with. Septic to sewer conversion program. The bipartisan infrastructure law created a program that would help individual homeowners actually connect to sewer systems if they're currently on septic systems. It was great that the bipartisan infrastructure law created that. Unfortunately, Congress never appropriated funding for it. So that's something we're advocating for them to actually appropriate funding for that so that program can be stood up. And then hopefully that's something your residents in the city would be able to take advantage of. Defense Community Infrastructure Program, or DCIP for short. This is something we have gone in with the city manager and deputy mayor there to meet with that program and talk about the opportunities that may exist for the city of Lacey to take advantage of. And again, it's just military communities. It's an infrastructure program that can help military communities construct priority projects. National housing and homeless strategy continues to be something that we push on the feds to implement and to get in the game there, stop putting it all on the local governments, and that it remains on your agenda too from last year. And then support for community programs, CDBG, and COPS. And Joel will talk a little bit more about this too, in terms of kind of what the funding picture looks like going into this new Congress and new administration. But just again, we're going to be doing a lot of protection around community development block grants and some of these other federal programs that cities indirectly can take advantage of or indirectly receive funding for, and on maintaining support for those programs. The Helper Act, this is I'm trying to remember the acronym now. It's Every Local Protector, Educator, and Responder Helper Act. So it sets up a program for first-time home buyers that are classified as first responders, where they wouldn't have a down payment and they wouldn't have to have monthly mortgage insurance either. It has around 130 co-sponsors in the House. There is a chance that it could move this year, but I suspect that it's something that we'll see be reintroduced in the next Congress when they come back in January. But yeah, it continues to have bipartisan, very strong support. I know it's something that the council has been interested in, and we're certainly going to be pushing for that, or continuing to push for that moving into the future, or moving into next year, I should say. And Joel, I'll let you go ahead and go from here.
Yeah, and before we leave the federal agenda, I did want to mention this is a living, breathing document. If there are projects that are not on the list that you think are a priority for the city, we've been working with staff. We've been working with your team for a while on your agenda. The reason why there's fewer projects is because we've been able to work together and secure funding for a number of projects that have been on your list. So we're kind of rebuilding this project list. But if there are other priorities, we certainly are open to adding those to your list and would be interested in hearing more about them, and making sure that the congressional delegation understands all of the priorities that you all have. But this is kind of, like I said, a living, breathing document that we can work on and then finalize before the mayor comes back to DC in March, the March timeframe, and advocate directly for the city's projects. So just good record of success is one of the reasons why there's fewer projects than we typically have 4 or 5 on here, but you all have been so successful at securing funds in the last few years. That's a good reason to have a couple fewer projects. And then then we can move on to the next slide. So I was just going to do a quick overview of what you all will be walking into when you're coming back to Washington, D.C. and working at the federal level. A lot of this you all are obviously already know. President-elect Trump was able to secure 312 electoral college votes in the recent election and basically won every one of those battleground states in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and kind of swept that battleground map. He also was able to win the popular vote. So the Trump administration and Republicans feel like they're coming into 2025 with some level of a mandate. And so we're just going to be watching how they pursue their major initiatives going into the next Congress. And they're going to have some allies if you move to the next slide. Today, the Senate is controlled by Democrats, but because of the election in November, it's switching from Democrat to Republican control. So we're going from 51 Democratic members of the Senate to 53 Republican members of the Senate. So Republicans control the Senate 53-47 going into the next Congress. They picked up 4 seats to give them that majority. It's a tight majority. You typically need 60 votes to do many things in the Senate. They do only have 53, but I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about how having the Senate, the House, and the presidency allows you to do some additional legislative machinations to get some things done. So the Republicans maintain control of the House of Representatives. Their seat count goes from 222 down to 220. The magic number is 218 for a majority in the House. The Republicans have a 2-seat majority going into the next Congress. It's what's going to be really interesting is already a couple members of the House Republican caucus have been appointed by the Trump administration or will be appointed by the Trump administration to join their cabinet. So those numbers will actually go down and they'll likely only have a 1-seat majority through April. And trying to pass any legislation with a 1-seat majority is going to be extremely difficult. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. As well. But at the end of the day, Republicans have the presidency, the Senate with a 53-47, and then the House with a slim majority of 220 to 215. So the Republicans are eager to move into 2025 with one-party rule. What this means it's going to have a significant impact on obviously everything we do back here in Washington, D.C. The first thing that Congress is going to need to tackle is finishing up some of their old homework. Right now we're already into FY25. We're in the FY25 cycle. The FY25 budget has not been finalized yet. It's been extended through December 20th through a continuing resolution. And it's likely that Congress will pass next week a continuing resolution through March of 2025. And as David alluded, your project, earmark project, is included in this FY25 budget. And we were hoping to have it all finalized by the end of this year. But Speaker Johnson and a new Trump administration are looking to work on this bill in early 2025. They're trying to provide some additional spending restraints in the FY25 package, but we don't think they're going to have too much success in reducing funding right off the bat. They still need 60 votes in the Senate to do any changes, and Democrats are likely going to protect a lot of the programs that are important to the city. What the primary calculus here and why they're extending the budget until March of 2025 is that Speaker Johnson does not want to have a vote on a big omnibus appropriations bill next week because there's a number of members of his caucus that just don't like omnibus appropriations bill. There's 12 bills that make up the appropriations process. Combining them all together in one bill, there's a number of House conservatives that do not like doing that. So if Speaker Johnson forced that on his members next week, he would have a tough time becoming Speaker in January 3rd of 2025. So strategically, he is punting that until March so he can pass a short-term continuing resolution through March, be elected as Speaker in January 3rd of 2025, and then ultimately get back to finalizing the FY25 budget, where they're going to have to rely on Democratic votes, and Democrats and Republicans will likely, in a bipartisan fashion, finish off the FY25 bill. But that's the primary reason why the budget won't be finalized next week. We are also going to be going into debt limit negotiations again. I hope you all are sitting down, but our country's debt is at $35 trillion. So we have a significant debt. And every couple of years or every year or so, we need to increase that credit card limit on the nation's debt. And that negotiation starts in January, and we're going to need to do something by around June of 2025. We're currently operating under a debt limit that was agreed to a debt limit increase that was agreed to by former Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, and that clock runs out in early 2025. And so they're going to have to either figure out how to increase that credit card limit. In the past, Republicans have required some spending reductions as part of that. But when there was one party rule, when President Trump was formally in office, they just extended it without any spending constraints. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that in 2025. Like I mentioned, there's tight margins in the House and the Senate. Outside of what they call budget reconciliation, which I'll talk about on the next bullet point, it's going to be tough to do any major bills, any major bills passed without bipartisan support, with that 1-seat or 2-seat majority in the House and the 3-seat majority in the Senate. So I think Congress may not be that productive in 2025 or 2026. One way to get around the 60 vote filibuster requirement is what they call to pass a reconciliation bill. The reconciliation process was started in 1974 to try to reduce debts and deficits. It's an expedited budget process that only requires a simple majority in the Senate versus the 60 vote filibuster majority. Excuse me. But unfortunately, or whatever your belief is, over the last 20 years or so, this budget process has typically been used to increase deficits rather than decrease deficits by both Republicans and Democrats, starting with President George W. Bush. He passed a significant tax cut bill in 2001 and again in 2003, used reconciliation. President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, through the reconciliation package. President Trump passed in 2017 his tax cut and reform bill through reconciliation, and President Biden passed the ARPA, the COVID relief bill, which had a significant spending for COVID relief through reconciliation. What is created by reconciliation? Well, I should also say President Biden also passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the biggest climate change sustainability bill ever passed in the history of the United States. Whatever is created by reconciliation can be eliminated by reconciliation. So the Republicans in Congress are going to be looking to claw back some of those Inflation Reduction Act energy sustainability programs, including tax cuts for EVs and solar and wind. Those are all on the chopping block, in addition to a number of grant programs that were created under the Inflation Reduction Act for sustainability and climate. In addition, Obamacare could be on the chopping block. I don't think in full, but there's portions of it that the Republican Congress are going to be looking to offset some of the additional costs of tax. So there's a number of tax provisions tax cut provisions that expire at the end of 2025, and that President-elect Trump ran on extending those tax cuts and increasing them in some areas, including tips for the service industry. So they're looking to do a significant tax cut reform bill in the first 100 days, but they're going to look to try to pay for it. And one of those areas could be clawing back some of those sustainability programs created under the Inflation Reduction Act, possibly Obamacare. And there's also some concern about impacts to cuts to Medicaid as well. President-elect Trump says he would not be cutting Social Security, would not be cutting Medicare, but there hasn't been a commitment to not cutting Medicaid. So I think there's some folks worried about that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's possible that the Trump administration with the Republican Congress could pass some significant tax cuts, tax reform bill within the first 100 days that also has some energy policy associated with it and immigration reform, including funding for the border wall. So we're keeping a close eye on that. And I know there are some areas to play defense here for the city and aligning with the National League of Cities on some of these priorities as well. Trump 2.0, they're going to be, as the president-elect and some of his allies have already suggested, they're going to be looking to cut a number of programs through the federal government and reduce the size of the federal government overall. They are going to run into that 60 vote threshold in the Senate on many of these areas with the filibuster. So I think there's going to be a number of different strategies that the Trump administration takes going into 2025. One of those is going to be the policy of attrition. Right now, many federal government employees are not required to come into work other than a couple times a month. It's already been it seems clear that on day one, President-elect Trump is going to require folks to come into work with executive orders on day one, 5 days a week. And that's probably going to lead to some personnel leaving the federal government, and they may not replace some of those positions. There's that, and there's some other ways that they can cut some federal spending as well. So we're keeping an eye on all of that as the Trump administration comes into office. So it's going to be a very dynamic 2025. There's a number of areas that we're playing offense in terms of your federal agenda, but also playing some defense when it comes to some of the programs that are really important to the city of Lacey. And so we're looking forward to continue to work with you on those items, and looking forward to the mayor's trip out to DC to reconnect with some of your congressional delegation and the agencies that have been really helpful to your priorities over the recent years. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions on your agenda or what's going on in DC. Happy to answer any of those questions.
So look forward to seeing you again in March. Let's go to Robin since she has her hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, David and Joel, both for the presentation. It was a nice kind of overview of a lot of stuff that's been going on fast and furious the last couple of weeks. I did have a question about one of our priority items. It lists that we've got a request for $10 million for the College Street corridor improvements. And I know that we've also indicated in our packet materials that we're asking for another $1 million, and we're seeking money through the RAISE grant. So is our ask that you guys are fighting for $10 million that will kind of stack on top of the RAISE grant, maybe making us look more competitive to get that additional grant money? Or is the 10 million part of that grant request?
So yeah, the 10 million is part of that grant request. And I should have prefaced that with that request is not, we haven't settled on exactly what that dollar amount is going to be quite yet. So there's, I think the 850,000.
10 million-ish.
Yeah, 10 million-ish, exactly. And
Okay.
that's something we'll be, working with Public Works and Shannon with to kind of fine tune that for next year's application into the RAISE program. There was, I believe it was 850,000 for an earmark for College Street. That's already done. Like that passed in the appropriations bill. We have that. So I apologize. I should have flagged that 10 million was, an ish as we fine tune it, which is why, the agenda is still in draft form, obviously, as we work towards finalizing that.
Well, and it's interesting because we have money coming in. It's sort of a patchwork quilt of funding sources to try to get some of these big projects done. I know the Thurston Regional Planning Council in our meeting on Friday allocated like $1.5 million for the College Street corridor project as well for right-of-way related expenses. So that's just one step in a multi-step process to do the improvements we need. So it's good to know we're planning for the funding we're going to need for the next several years through this federal ask.
Yep, exactly.
And I would just say, the RAISE grant, the deadline is January 30th, so that project will be submitted in early 2025, and then we'll be working with the congressional delegation. Yep, it's soon, and working with the Department of Transportation, try to see if that work that competitive grant through the process, and we expect those decisions to be made in the summer of 2025.
Yeah, we know we're short on our College Street corridor just because the costs have gone up, quite a bit since we originally had a number of what that was going to cost. So we're still working on what that actual final number is, but we know we need more to get that project, this phase of the project completed. So. I also want to mention, when we were looking at the septic to sewer conversion, one of the things that we know is obviously that we haven't appropriated, that Congress hasn't appropriated money for that program, but they have appropriated money for clean water programs. And I know a lot of that's going to conversion of old pipes, and that's important, but obviously, a conversion from septic to sewer is also a clean water initiative. Is there any possibility of getting some help on making that argument and maybe opening up some dollars for projects like septic to sewer using dollars that are already out there? And from what I've heard of is there's a lot of money there, and hasn't all been used. So there may be a pot of dollars that we could use under the clean water side of things.
David, do you want to talk about the funding? So Washington State gets formula funds to replace lead pipes.
Yeah, it's called the State Revolving Fund.
Yes.
So I believe it was the Inflation Reduction Act created. No, excuse me, it was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law.
It's the bipartisan.
Created new funding streams for. So one of them was replacing lead pipes, and then the other one was for emerging contaminants, which is PFAS, forever chemicals, quote unquote. So the states get an allocation for that, and then they can, distribute those as needed. In Washington, we don't have a ton of lead pipes, and Washington has actually ended up having to give back a lot of that money. Now we have emerging contaminants has definitely been something, PFAS has been an issue across the country and in the state. They're using all of that. But that's one thing, we've talked a little bit about with the congressional delegation, not necessarily for you, but just broadly about making that more flexible. So that states can decide how best to deploy that funding within their actual state. So like in the Midwest, lead pipes is a bigger issue. They're certainly going to use that funding. I don't know that it would necessarily help here with septic to conversion, but I was going to mention earmark funding. Joel, I don't know if you look like you.
Well, I just want to say, I think, Mayor, it might be a good idea to put this on your agenda so we can talk about it with your congressional delegation and say, instead of the state sending back the money on lead pipes in replacement of those, you have a number of needs in the city that could utilize those funds, and maybe we can have some additional flexibility to use those for septic conversion or other possibilities. So I think that makes sense to add it to the federal agenda, because you're just sending, the state is just sending that money back to DC.
Yeah, when I heard that we were sending dollars back through that program, I cringed. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I can't, we have safe water needs.
Yep.
It's not lead pipes, but there's,
Yep.
we do have our needs, and mostly it's failing septic systems. So it seems to me like that would be a good use of those dollars instead of sending them back. So I agree.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we can add to your agenda, and we can talk to Shannon about that.
Great. Does anyone else have anything? Oh, Robin, do you still have your hand up?
It's you. I've asked them a lot of questions. I don't know if anybody else in the room has questions, but I had two more.
Okay, go for it.
One, have you guys heard any conversation or exploration of interest around changes to the childcare at the federal level? That's billions of dollars that go to states to provide subsidies for childcare in our communities. I don't know, is that even on the table at all, that you're aware of any changes, make expansions to childcare for people in the lower income brackets?
I generally no, other than I would say that it's a huge priority for Senator Murray, as I'm sure you were aware. I think, and Joel, feel free to jump in here too, that is unlikely to be a priority, I would say, for, unfortunately, the Trump administration or this incoming majorities in Congress. Joel, I don't know if you have a different take on that, but that's unfortunately where I kind of see that setting right now.
Yeah, to David's point about Senator Murray, she has looked to support congressionally directed spending or earmarks towards those types of projects. There just isn't as much money at the federal level as I think a lot of communities need. But talking to the delegation about your needs is extremely important. And this is a long-term issue and a long-term push to try to get more federal investments directed at childcare. And it's just the senator, I think your congressional delegation understands it. But there might be some, if there are specific projects in the city that could use additional capital help, operational help, or equipment, we can certainly try to provide specific benefits. But I think like David said, at the programmatic level, it's going to be difficult to plus up funding in some of these programs over the next couple of years.
I think we'll probably have an ask for you next cycle, because we do have a potential partnership to build a child care center.
Well, yeah.
But we're not at the point where we can ask for a specific amount of money yet.
And that is our DCIP.
And that's
angle,
right. Yeah,
right?
that sounded familiar. The DSIP. Yeah.
The
yeah.
DSIP money that we're looking to go, but we understand under the DSIP program, they want to be sort of the last money in. So we're a long ways away from the last money in, but we would love to find other opportunities because that is a huge need in our community. And for the military as well, that's why we're making that connection. But this will only partially help. We know we have other early childhood education needs and programs for early childhood education, right? That's why we're looking for the expansion, because it's going to add opportunities for like a gym or other things for the kids under 5 years old. So it's really needed, and it's really something we hear in our community that we'd love to have. We just have to figure out how we build it. So that's.
And it's just one of those things. Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's just one of those things at the federal level. It's still disappointing that we don't hear more about this. During the presidential campaign, we didn't hear too much about it on either side. And so I think raising it from the local level and bringing it up to DC to make sure that they understand is going to be critically important in moving forward. So it's something that is something we hear a lot about.
Yeah. Robin, you have something else?
I'm wondering whether maybe this is a question for Shannon or you, Mayor, but we know we have a need with JASCOM, our Joint Animal Services facility, and I don't know if it makes sense to ask for federal funding for capital for that once we have a better sense of what we're going to do.
Yeah, we've discussed that at the staff level a little bit, there isn't a funding stream that fits nicely with that. I would say there is a chance for maybe an earmark, but it would be through a very competitive competitive account within earmarks. So we've certainly explored that. And we'll continue to explore that because honestly, opportunities for funding comes up, a lot that we may not see right now. But it's something that we've discussed. I'm fairly familiar with that request, just generally. And it's something we're keeping an eye on if we can find, a creative way when it's ready to try to access some federal funds for that.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else from the council? I guess I have one quick thing. One thing that we're hearing rumblings of and we have for a while is President Trump's wanting to bring back tariffs and what that will do to sort of the cost of everything we're trying to do project-wise. I'm not familiar with, is that completely an executive branch decision or will it need congressional approval?
Yeah, it's an executive branch decision, although they can legislate it too, but typically it's something that the president is able to do.
And do you believe there's a high likelihood that that's going to happen? And is it going to be on everything or is it going to be on certain?
I'm trying to be diplomatic. I try to take President-elect Trump at his word. He has said that he intends to impose a 10% blanket tariff on Chinese goods on day one that he comes into office. Recently he said the same for Canadian and Mexico goods, 25%, and then he's also said that he wants to take it up to 60% for Chinese goods. He can do that. I would anticipate we will see some sort of tariff, at least on Chinese goods. And what that looks like, not entirely clear, I would say. I think we have to see what he does. And then importantly, we have to see how other countries react to that with retaliatory tariffs, very likely. An interview recently that he did, I think he was asked if it would raise the cost of consumer goods. And I think he conceded that it very well could. So bottom line, I fully anticipate that is coming. Now, what that looks like exactly and, what the impacts of that are, I think is an open question at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you. I thought that NAFTA sort of overrode that ability to do tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but maybe, I guess not.
You're getting way into the weeds here, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that's there is a mechanism to get around that. NAFTA was replaced with the USMC, the US. Joel, do you remember the
MCA?
MCA, thank you. And there is an opportunity to place tariffs on that. And just as another note, Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada has said that they would reply or they would respond with their own tariffs if that did happen. So you could potentially see the snowballing. A lot of my economist friends are a little nervous about it, to say the least. And, we'll just kind of have to see what happens as that comes.
Okay. Well, thank you. You have something, Shannon?
Yeah, so if I could just moving forward with the federal legislative priorities, what I heard was some conversation on adding some policy positions on childcare being a priority and programs associated with that, as well as some language here on flexible spending for clean water programs. And so I just want to get some consensus that we'll move forward with adding those items and bring this back up.
Everyone okay with that? Mm-hmm. Yep. Thumbs up all around.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you in March and look forward to that. And I'm sure we'll sit down and game plan that, as we always do. So we'll see you in March.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. So next up on our agenda is our WCIA risk management.
You can sit wherever you want. Good afternoon, or Council members, this is Rob Roscoe. He's the Deputy Director for Washington City's Insurance Authority and is here to give a risk management training for the city. So I'm just going to be sitting here. I don't really have anything to offer unless there's questions or commentary.
Are you saying you're ornamental?
Correct. Well, Rick asked me to sit here, so I will. No.
And I will defer to him quite a bit. Do I need to turn this on?
Yeah, please.
Okay, there you go. Good evening. Welcome. My name's Rob Roscoe. As Dave said, I am the Deputy Director for Washington City's Insurance Authority. We are a interlocal government agency. We provide insurance coverages for municipalities in the state of Washington. So while we provide insurance, we are not for profit, and that is a big distinction. We do not underwrite to make a profit. We underwrite to try to cover our costs. So we were created back in 1981 by 9 local municipalities in the Puget Sound region, primarily because, believe it or not, government is not a very good underwriting risk. You cost them a lot of money, and what coverage you were able to procure was very expensive, and you had very little control or direction on how claims were handled or settled. So they decided to create their own insurance company, and that's exactly what they did. We started off with 9 municipalities. We are now at 170 different members throughout the state of Washington. We do not insure any state or county governments. You have to either be a municipality or provide a municipal function, such as a water sewer district, 911 dispatch center, fire district, fire authority, have to have some kind of tie-in to a municipal function in order to be a member in WCIA. And I will say, it is a very trying time right now to be providing insurance for government agencies in the state of Washington. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of a brief update on where we're at in the market. I'm not sure how much time I have, but please, I'm here to hopefully answer any questions, concerns you guys might have as well. I will talk a little bit about some liability exposures with being on council, and as well as municipal exposures as well that impact your operations. One of the benefits, though, of being a member of WCA is we are run by our members. We're owned by our members, we're run by our members, and our members actually get to decide upon coverages as well. Every member has a delegate. They get to vote on our coverage document, and that's very important. 2 years ago, we decided to expand we have a complete exclusion for medical malpractice. It's nothing that we want to be in the business of, but we do provide coverage for EMTs, fire personnel, and we also expanded it for crisis responders because we saw a need for mental health assistance for police officers when they're out in the field. We're trying to make sure that police aren't being called for every 911 situation. So some agencies are hiring crisis responders where they're going out there, and we were fearful that municipalities then could be sued for having those responders out there. So we decided to expand our coverage to include that for them. We don't think it'll ever rise to a medical malpractice situation, but as your city attorney can attest to, that doesn't mean someone won't sue you for it. So just because you get sued, you would also have some defense costs, and that's where we would come in as well to provide that defense for them. We're also very big at providing trainings for staff, assisting with different exposures. If the city wants to provide a new program or service, I'm real good at saying don't do it, because the exposure's too great, but I also understand the reality. I can't put everyone in a bubble yet. I'm working on that. But you still have to provide these services. Mm-hmm. So our job is to try to educate staff to go in with their eyes open. I was talking to Troy Wu actually earlier. I knew him from back when he was at another municipality. I've been involved with WCA for 24 years now. I actually worked there, then I went to go work for a municipality. So I had the unique experience of actually being on the other side as well. I was Director of Human Resources and Risk Management at the City of Auburn for 12 and a half years. So I understand your perspective, and I understand the impacts that these decisions have as well. I've been back with WCA now for about 6 years, but my philosophy is you want to embrace it or divorce yourself from it. Embrace it means go in with your eyes open, educate staff, and put as many controls as you possibly can do, or try to transfer it to a third party through indemnification risk transfer to someone else to do that same service and let them be responsible for it. So that's kind of that philosophy. We do have an actuary. We try to be as stable as we can with our rates. And that's a balancing act we have, because we want to hold members accountable for their loss history, but we also want to keep rates as stable as possible. So there's a little bit of a balancing act that our actuary does and when they assess our rates. And I'll go over a little bit with that for the city of Lacey. I will say, we put all of our members into what we call our actuarial groups based on the size of the cities, and the actuary establishes a rate per group. City of Lacey, you're in what's called our Group 4 actuarial group. That means you have over 400,000 worker hours annually. You're one of our larger groups. And I will say you're probably one of my best members throughout WCA. And that's due to your loss history. That's due to staff, city attorney, council. You guys have been very good. What happens is the actuary looks at losses and he applies what's called a mod factor to the base rate. So if you're average, you have a mod factor of 1. It's similar to how workers' compensation is run in the state of Washington. If you're better than average, you get a mod factor below 1. Actually, the city of Lacey's mod factor for 2025's assessment was 0.46. So you're better than half the group average per worker hour. That saves you millions of dollars. I am not kidding. There are some cities paying over $3 million to WCA on an annual basis for just general liability coverage.
Wow.
That's a lot of money. You know your ability to raise revenue is very limited and restricted. Unfortunately, the cost for doing business is going up at a tremendous rate. We're in a very precarious situation right now with liability insurance in the state of Washington.
What's driving that?
Jury verdicts and settlements. And I have a slide on that, I believe. Well, right here. Let's go back. Proliferation of nuclear verdicts nationally. Not only nationally, but in the state of Washington. State of Washington is very bad because of a lot of factors, and joint and several liability being one, but we also don't have what's called tort caps. So we're the wild, wild west. We're one of only about 4 or 5 states that still have some form of joint and several liability. What that means is if you are at least partially responsible, 1%, and you have an individual that's been harmed, maybe a passenger in a car, road design, huge exposure, and I'll talk about that later, or it could be a child in a crosswalk that are fault-free, and you're at least 1% at fault, you could pay the entire judgment. So if there is a judgment for $15 million and you're 1% at fault, they can collect the entire $15 million from the city of Lacey. Now, we would pay that on behalf of the city of Lacey, and then we would try to collect the remaining money from the at-fault party. But a lot of times that at-fault person does not have any assets which we can collect from, so we're left footing the entire bill. It's an unfair way of allocating costs, but our legislature wants to make sure that if an individual is harmed, they have a resource to recover from. And it's a hard argument to go against because sometimes you're dealing with some very tragic situations.
Yeah.
You have a death, you have a fatality, you have a quadriplegic, you have severe medical issues that someone has to deal with, lifelong issues that they now have to recover from, but unfortunately, you're going to be viewed as that deep pocket. We've tried to make some headway with tort reform with the state legislature, and I didn't know they were here earlier. I probably would have tried to jump up and say, tort reform, please help us out, because it is in a crisis situation. I had 2 reinsurers pull out of the state of Washington in 2022. What I mean is, WCA, we provide $20 million in liability coverage to the city of Lacey. WCA funds the first $4 million of that with our own money. And then I have to go out and buy reinsurance above that. So it's a way of insurance companies to try to limit their overall exposure. Just like you are doing, you're buying insurance, I buy insurance above my own self-funding layer. We have what's called Government Entities Mutual, which is it's called Government GEM. Everyone, we love our acronyms. We're WCIA. It's not Washington Central Intelligence.
Yeah.
A lot more exciting if it were, but it's insurance. But we love those. So we have GEM, which is a risk pool created by risk pools for reinsurance. This year, they told me that they were going to cut my capacity and raise my self-insured retention, so I couldn't go to 4 million, had to go to 5 million. I cried, saying, you can't do this to me at the last minute, because I'm in negotiations still right now for next year's policy for reinsurance. We've already set the city's rates, but I have to then cover my costs through reinsurance. My reinsurers telling me they don't want me. And this was a risk pool created by risk pools, saying this is all you do is insure municipalities, and they're saying we don't want you, and they're my best partner. We had 2 carriers pull out of the state in 2022 entirely saying no more. We're not underwriting any public agencies in the state of Washington because the risks are too great. You have huge verdicts, you have no tort caps, and it's hard for them to try to underwrite for a profit, where they may be generating a let's say, $200,000 policy, but they're on the hook for $5 million. Well, how are they ever going to collect enough money to pay that verdict when they have to now pay out their policy limits? So that's where these costs are spiraling and getting out of control. My costs for reinsurance have gone up 500% from 2014 through 2024. I don't have 25's cost yet. I'm still waiting to see what pain I'm going to have to pay to get that. Now, my one reinsurer did concede, and they're not going to raise my self-insured layer this year, and they agreed, put me on notice for next year, though, saying, get ready for it, because we have to actuarially study for that, because now I have to fund to 5 million rather than 4 million. It's just, I had a full head of hair before I started working there. It is that crazy. But when you look at it, Washington, we're the number 3 in the nation per capita for large verdicts. That has a cost. It's not an unlimited well that they can keep going to fund for these verdicts. And it's not just private entities. There was a case I read about just last month. UPS got hit with a hostile work environment claim. Just a hostile work environment for a driver. $234 million. It got reduced down to $34 million, and this was out of Yakima. It wasn't even on the west side, and it was in federal court. That is eye-opening. You don't have $34 million in coverage. You have $20 million with us. So how much is too much? Well, I can't get any more. So there is no more to even purchase if we wanted to buy more.
Is the state familiar with the because I've heard this not only now from you, but from other insurance providers who are saying, you know, guess what? We can't build condos anymore because it's just.
Florida is running into that with homeowners insurance now. California too with wildfire exposure. It's not unique, but we've gone to the legislature, and unfortunately, the legislature told us we're the problem. Excuse me, we're the problem? We're the problem because we're paying for these verdicts on behalf of municipalities. They want you to have to pay for it out of your general fund. Well, ultimately, all of our cities are paying for it because we're nonprofit, and then we take your money and we pool it and we pay for these. And we tell the legislature, they look at us as an insurance company. We're not an insurance company, we're a risk pool. They don't listen to us as much as they will listen to you. They listen to their local municipalities better than they will ever listen to us because they don't hear it from us. And unfortunately, they're funded through a lot of campaign contributions from
the
the
trial
plaintiff
lawyers.
attorneys,
Yeah,
trial
yeah,
attorneys,
yeah.
the Justice League, I like to call them. They're now the, I forget what their acronym is, but they're like the Justice Foundation, something or other. I just call them the Justice League. But not only do they impact the legislature, but they're also impacting the courts now as well, especially in the west side and in Pierce County in particular. It's very difficult for us to take cases that we think are even defensible with good facts if we have certain judges, because they're not going to let us. We had a situation with the crosswalk where we presented a accident reconstruction, and the judge threw it out because it was too convincing. That's the goal, is to be convincing.
Yeah.
That's the intent and purpose, is to try to defend this crosswalk, and it got thrown out. Now, it was appealable, but that just drives the costs.
Yeah.
And those are things, insurance is a very cyclical industry. Right now, the pendulum, it used to be property as well. We had 5 straight years of horrible property. I just renewed our property program, and this is the first time in 6 years that I actually got a rate reduction. I got a rate reduction because I've done a great job at putting our property values where they need to be. We do loss control. We're doing a lot of things that the industry likes, that we're able to procure a reduction. Now, the members will see that reduction in 2026, unfortunately, as long as we don't have any adverse claims that develop. But that's on the property side. Liability, it is unsustainable where the way rates are going. And unfortunately, we have to pass those costs back onto our members. And you're going to be bearing the brunt of that through the budget process, is trying to come up. I was just watching the news today, City of Edmonds trying to struggle with their budget with police now. They may have to contract because they can't pay. They're a member of mine. Olympia's in a budget deficit. A lot of my members are struggling trying to pay for their costs. Insurance is one component to it, but you still have to provide these services to the public.
I'm sure you're in contact with the AWC.
Definitely. We work with AWC and the legislative agenda.
Have they added that to their legislative agenda? I should know this since I'm on their legislative agenda.
We tried to
Don't
get
think it is.
some form of modified joint and several liability. California has one where it has to be 51% at fault. California's more conservative than Washington State. That's how crazy we are in our state. And the legislature said, go bang your head against the wall. Or our lobbyist said, go, you're not going to make any headway. They have, sometimes AWC has some other bigger agendas as well that they have to try to balance it with. We're really focused, obviously, on tort reform and liability because this is our bread and butter. This is what we do. And I hate having to raise costs every year to our members. And they have to balance it with the politics that come into play with trying to get other bills passed as well. And they said, with this legislature, you're not going to get anywhere with it. You're going to drown, basically. You're not even going to tread water. You're going to go down.
The private insurance companies have been fighting this for years as well, and
They
it's
have.
the same problem, because I'm in the insurance business, and we have companies leaving Washington
Yep.
crazy right now, and that's the reason. Nuclear verdicts are a big part of the reason they're leaving. I mean, Chubb, one of the largest insurance company in the world, just pulled their products out of the state of Washington.
I'm insured by Chubb.
But not all products, but their apartment product is
Okay.
gone. It doesn't exist
A little
there.
bit too, it is within the state legislative manual on page 5 is.
Okay, cool.
The
That's
city's
gonna be-
position on public, or prevent liability expansion, pursue crucial liability reforms, and it's talks to these issues. So it is something that, while it's not one of the top 4 that we talked about earlier, it is part of that opportunity where Brian and Shannon and all of us will be looking at and reinforcing with the legislature.
One of the scarier components right now, too, is we have a new insurance commissioner that just got elected, Patty Cooter. She's a plaintiff attorney. She said she wants to initiate a bill for prejudgment interest. That is going to increase all settlements and all costs for insurance if that gets passed. The state legislature tried to pass a bill the last 3 years and it got voted down each time. Luckily, now if it comes from the agency, now it's going to have deference and we're fearful that it's going to get passed. If that gets passed, that's only going to increase costs. So that means that we have to pay judgment at the time of the incident, not at the time of a verdict or settlement. So every plaintiff attorney knows that. So when we're trying to settle these cases, they're going to throw in there, well, I want my prejudgment interest. Otherwise, I'll go to court and get it. So it just increases the cost for settlements as well. So it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. I wish I had better news. And I'm sorry, I could talk for hours on this stuff, and I know you have a late and a packed agenda, but I'll try and get onto some of these issues as well, what we can do from a council perspective. But I just want to paint the picture so you're aware why costs are going up. It's not because we need to fund my private jet. It's just the fact that the cost for insurance and our cost for operations are getting out of control. The state got hit with a $100 million verdict with a tragic fatality with the Susan Cox or Powell fatality with 2 young children that were brutally murdered by their dad. Court ordered supervision. Court said you have to give the dad supervision. The dad takes the kids from the from the court supervisor into his trailer park, brutally murders them, sets it on fire, and the state was found to be partially liable. $100 million. We thought that that could be a catalyst for some potential tort reform. Nope, state did not blink an eye. They basically told us, go away. That's what we're in. And what we've seen, unfortunately, this is just from the last 2 years, we've seen some huge verdicts come out. Spokane County Sheriff's Department, $20 million for defamation. Defamation, that's not a quadriplegic, that's not a shooting, that's defamation for a fired sheriff who allegedly used some racially offensive language on the radio, got fired. He then sued for defamation and won.
Wow.
Yes. Again, these things are all things that we have to deal with that we insure. But this is what we do. This is why we were created, was to provide protection for municipalities for operating and providing services to your residents. You can't just say you can't operate, you have to operate. But what we want to do is educate people so you're trying to mitigate and eliminate the dangerous components of those services that you're providing. The last one is, that's the only one that's actually ours, is the town of Steilacoom. We had a $15 million drowning that we ended up settling. We did mock juries on this, and we were coming back with $34 million verdicts against the town. What happened there is we had a 14-year-old in a park and rec program, and they decided to go to a local watering hole on Anderson Island. It was lake. My family has property out there. I'm very familiar with that. I used to ride my bike there when I was 14 on my own.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, it was a park supervised program. So as a supervised program, you have responsibility for that child. They ended up leaving them unsupervised for 5 minutes as they drove back to the ferry to pick up another set of kids because they only had one vehicle to go back and forth. Poor planning on their part. And in that time, the child jumped into the lake and drowned. Very tragic and hard to stay. But at the same time, you're now responsible, $15 million. So again, just some of the things that, and you have park programs, you have police. I will say though, Lacey, knock on wood, you guys have been very fortunate, but not to say it only takes 1 or 2 situations like that and costs will escalate and it'll limit your ability then to provide other services that you want to for your residents. So let's talk about being on the council though, and how trying to avoid liability. There's some good news, actually. You have some pretty good immunity while you're serving as an elected official. We used to see city council members individually sued quite a bit. Now we don't see that a lot anymore. Now it's just more, unfortunately, officers because of civil rights violations, and then the town or the city itself as well. But you have to remember, it's while you're serving as the elected official, as a council as a whole, not as an individual council member. Once you step outside that role, you start opening up scrutiny and creating some potential exposure individually. So it's while you're acting as a council in that legislative process, you have some immunity for your conduct and your actions. Land use is probably one of the biggest areas of exposure we face with council, especially if you were in the quasi-judicial process. I do believe you guys have a hearing examiner now?
Yep.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. When I was at the City of Auburn, that's the first thing we did. I tried to do, and we did, was get them out of that quasi-judicial capacity, where you now have the appearance of fairness doctrine, and it's so complicated and difficult, because you have the general public that are always going to want to communicate to you. They'll come in on public comment. Even though those are not facts introduced into the record, you can't unring bells and you can't not hear things, but you can't rule and legislate based or make decisions based on what you hear. You can only make decisions based on what's in the record.
We've
So-
experienced this.
Yeah, so thank you, because hearing examiners are our best friend when it comes to that. And it also frees you to be able to talk to your constituents a little bit more freely as well. So that is a very good thing because of the appearance of fairness doctrine and the arbitrary and capricious decisions. Westmark versus Burien is one of our biggest cases we had. It's when Burien first incorporated, and Westmark was a development that was going up and it was going to block some views. And it was permitted through King County. So it was when they were unincorporated. And then the city incorporates and they take over the permitting process. And though that development's going to block some council member views too, Puget Sound area. So the next thing you know, they're delaying the process, or it's going on way too long, and the developer ended up suing. We had like 3 different lawsuits out of this, to the tune of over $50 million spent in indemnification and defense costs. So these things can get very costly very quickly, especially when you're dealing with developments. Development agreements, I do have to caution you on. This is a huge area of concern, and it's not necessarily covered by WCIA, because what it is it's now a contract. Development agreement is between you and a developer that says you do this, we get that. And it's a creative way to sometimes go outside of even your own codes and zonings issues. But be very, very careful about them. One, you could be binding future councils, and opinions and what you want today may not be what future council wants 10 to 15 years from now. And even with expiration dates, we had a situation with a member city that they thought that the development agreement had expired, so they no longer had to follow it. Well, the developer alleged that it only expired because the city wanted it to expire, and they dragged their feet in permitting this and doing these conditions, and the court agreed with them. So they thought it had expired, but then they got back into it. Not only that, we had another member city, and this is a huge one. This just happened within the past 2 months. A decision came about because in the development agreement, it had mandatory arbitration. So they didn't even go to court. It was a mandatory arbitration that was favorable to developers because they all pay into these arbitration companies and the developers. And they go to arbitration and they find that the city felt like they were completely defendable. We didn't like it. We paid our money and got out and said, good luck, city. But the city felt pretty confident that they were going to win. Arbitrator came back with a $22 million verdict against the city. I don't think they have $22 million. They're meeting with bankruptcy counsel now to talk about this. So this has some very huge implications. So be very careful because when you get into contracts, it's now contract law. It's not a tort. We cover your torts, your civil liability, not your breaches of contract. Contracts are you have to do something and you fail to do it, well, that's now a breach. So be very careful about your utilization of those development agreements. I hate them. I was very cognizant and restrictive of our utilization of those, and you have to go in there with your eyes open and be very careful about what you're committing future councils to if you do want to utilize them. Personnel, this is my plea to you as a former HR risk manager. You have a city manager. Let your city manager deal with the executive side of city personnel. You do not want to get dragged into personnel cases that can be very complicated. What's legal today may be illegal tomorrow. It's very dynamic. It's decided through court interpretation and case laws. So it's always expanding and changing. And some things can be very innocuous, but it can be interpreted and perceived in a negative or hostile or inappropriate way. So my plea to you is, if you have HR come up and maybe advise you, Mayor, you may not want to refer to the staff as ladies or girl. It's gender specific. Just say workers or I don't even know. Don't say girls. You can say ladies, but girls is more derogatory meaning. Don't argue about whether or not it's offensive. Just stop the behavior. Stop the behavior. This is very difficult for me, because if you have staff and you don't ever want to look at staff as your Tinder list, unfortunately, some elected officials have done that and started to try to date staff. That can get very complicated very easily. Now, if staff is doing that, they have administrative policies to deal with that. They have procedures to follow. They can put controls in place. Do marriages occur in the workplace? Of course they do. I think 40% of all marriages, or 50% of all marriages, come now from interaction at work. 60% of all divorces come from those same interactions. So, yes, it happens, but there are policies and procedures. And Rick, the city manager, has some controls that he can deal with to effectuate a change. I can't fire the mayor. I can't fire council members. So that creates a very precarious situation from a liability perspective, because our ability to effectuate your behavior is very limited. Now, if we have noticed that you're creating a hostile work environment for an employee, they have an obligation to protect that employee, and they're going to do what they can to try to do so. Now, here's the situation. You have $20 million in liability coverage. We insure the City of Lacey, employees, elected officials, and volunteers in our coverage document, as long as you're acting within the course and scope of your duties for the City of Lacey. If you're told to stop that behavior, you should not be engaged in seeking a relationship with a staff member, and you continue to do so, you may be stepping outside of your role as an elected official. You may not have coverage with WCIA. Now you're going to be exposed individually for some potential exposure if that individual is found and you are found liable for creating that hostile work environment. Remember what I just said about UPS, $234 million? Courts take this very seriously. So my plea there is, if you're told to stop engaging in certain behavior, don't argue about being offensive or non-offensive. I'm just trying to be funny. Just stop the behavior and listen to HR and the city manager when it comes to those situations, because it can get very ugly very quickly. And again, if you're aware of a situation as well, make sure you report that to the city manager. So the city manager now can investigate it. So if you see two employees engaging in inappropriate behavior, telling inappropriate jokes, stories, innuendos, whatever, or creating a hostile environment to potential employees, let HR, let the city manager know, so the city manager can take proper action and do an investigation if one is warranted or merited, because you are still the City of Lacey as well. And if the city has notice, the city has duties in which they have to act, and they have policies and procedures that they have to follow to protect those employees. And you should be aware of those policies as well, because they apply to everybody within the city. Negligent misrepresentation. You may have noticed sometimes that the public may want to call you and talk to you. And sometimes they may tell you something happened. Don't say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, that was the city's fault, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Mm-hmm. I wish I could make that up. Those are actual statements made by council members to residents in the community, where sometimes it's not necessarily the city's fault. But then if that individual relies upon those words to their detriment, they have a detrimental reliance upon what the city said could be done. So don't be afraid to say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, we'll look into that. But don't say it was all our fault, we'll take care of everything. That's admitting fault. You don't want to do that. We have we have attorneys that can go to court and argue fault and negligence. Now, our mantra at WCA is we like to pay what we owe. We do. We want to make sure we're treating residents and individuals within your community, because we know you have to work and they live in your areas. We don't want to deny somebody a sewer backup if it's a city line that backed up into their home. We want to get them fixed and treat them fairly and try to pay what we feel we are responsible for. But we don't want to pay what we don't owe either, because we're dealing with taxpayer dollars and we're very cognizant of the costs and gifting of public funds and all those other things that can come into play when we're dealing with public monies. But if you go out there and you make those commitments, that's where we can get into problems. We had one situation where we had a downtown committee or downtown area that had strict zoning compliance with siding. And Joe wanted to re-side his business, and he calls up the mayor. Mayor, I just want to put on some cedar siding. Is that okay? Oh, Joe, that'd look great. Go ahead. So Joe does it. Code enforcement goes out there and red tags it, saying that does not comply with our downtown code. You had to put on X, Y, and Z laminate, whatever it was. Is that a problem?
Yes.
Yeah, of course it is. He bought all this stuff, hired a contractor, was in the middle of doing it, now code enforcement's telling him to red tag it? When the mayor told him he could, yeah, I'm gonna pay that claim 99.9% of the time. So be very careful about what you say to residents out there, and don't be afraid to refer them to proper departments and say you may wanna talk to the traffic engineer, you may wanna talk to code enforcement, whatever, so that they can get the resources they need to get back to them. Defamation as well. Be very careful about your comments in open session. You don't want to refer to people as slumlords. Not a good term, even though they may even exist. Not in Lacey, obviously, you have a beautiful community down here, but in neighboring unincorporated areas, I'm sure. But be very careful about that. Now, if you're dealing with an elected official, people of public prominence, they have a little higher threshold as to what's tolerated and what's not tolerated. But this thing can come back and haunt you. The truth gives us a defense, but that doesn't mean you still won't have some issues with having to defend you. We've paid close to $500,000 before and got complete defense verdicts. Is that still a win? Well, it's a win, but it's $500,000 in trying to prove we had done something right. And unfortunately, our system doesn't allow us to recover those defense dollars that we have to expend. So just be very careful about your comments when you're making decisions in open session, because those words are being recorded.
So-
You work in a fishbowl and everything can come back.
So just as an example, if we're making a comment about another elected official in a different jurisdiction, what is considered within the legislative ability and have immunity compared to it just being your opinion and it being
Elected
possible
officials
defamation?
have a little bit broader spectrum of that, and I defer to the city attorney regarding that. But you just want to be careful about getting into personal opinions and attacks on their character. That's where you're going to get into trouble, is if you're going and playing, I like to say, playing in the mud there. If you're slinging it, be careful about it, because something could stick.
Okay, thank you.
And I know there's been some legislation, or there's been some litigation over council members. Kasama Swant got sued from Seattle PD over comments she made over the police interaction up there in Seattle. And I know that litigation's kind of gone back and forth. At one point, she got a complete defense verdict, and then it got overturned, where there's some questions of fact now as to whether or not it was defamation. So courts are still struggling with that as well.
And this is the type of topic that if you ever have a question or concern about anything, I mean, this is when you reach out, hopefully when you're considering it beforehand. But if you're ever in a meeting, certainly you know,
Yeah.
holding,
Reach
holding.
reach out to either one of us, we'll huddle, or if I'm not available, the other, and vice versa, yeah.
I can't tell
We're
you.
lucky here, we've always had such good councils and such respectful discussion that we've
Yep.
been able to, stay out of situations like this.
And that's not always the
They can
case
creep up.
for
yeah.
a lot of my members. We get council that gets divided, they run on agendas, and it gets polarizing. And it's a battle now, and it's not always pretty. So again, I will say, city attorney is probably the best resource you can have regarding those questions and potential litigation areas. Public Works, I will take some time on this slide because this is near and dear to my heart. Political engineering, I like to call it. This is where good intentions have ramifications, and it can be widespread. Let's say you have a lot of residents in a certain area wanting to lower lower speed limits, or put in stop signs or crosswalks. Crosswalks are notorious for this. Crosswalks don't stop cars. They should, but they don't. There's no invisible force field that goes up. And unfortunately, you need to do traffic engineering studies, because that's what these claims turn into, is engineering malpractice situations. And if you arbitrarily start putting in traffic control devices without doing proper studies, you're creating a huge liability exposure, because it's hard enough for us to defend these situations, even when we have good traffic warrants and engineering studies. But if we don't have them, it's a checkbook. It's a matter of me trying to figure out how much are the damages and how much do we now have to pay. So be very careful about comments you make as well in open session about unsafe roads. That's an opinion. We've had to depose council members before in litigation saying, where did you get your traffic engineering degree at? I didn't. Okay, well then, let's stay to the facts here. And it can get that technical, but when you start giving your opinion about it being unsafe, or we need more lighting out there because it's a danger, well, that may not necessarily be the case. That could warrant further investigation and further studying, and you may want to get Public Works involved, but let the engineers engineer. Let them do their studies. Let them get their proper ducks lined up in a row before they make those changes. Because I tell you what, you put a traffic to stop, or you put a stop sign in here, stop traffic north and south, everyone going east and west now, you can't please everybody. It always it's a domino effect. So it's a system that they have to study and analyze based on certain criteria through manual for MUTCD, manual for uniform traffic control devices, AASHTO, all these things come into play that they have to use as a resource. And we're gonna go and try and defend the city for those actions based on that engineering criteria that merited and justified what they had done. So if you're arbitrarily putting those in there, this is where joint and several comes into play, because you can have a individual hitting a crosswalk who they're just in a crosswalk. They've done nothing wrong. The other driver is supposed to stop for them. But if the driver doesn't stop and hits them, and the driver only has $25,000 in liability coverage, and now they have severe life-altering injuries and medical conditions, they need to collect money from you. And they're gonna look to the city as the deep pocket.
So is that on any crosswalk?
That's any road.
Is that like the Union Street exit?
I'm not specific about anything, but every intersection is technically a crosswalk. Whether it's marked or unmarked is different, because every intersection is, by definition, a crosswalk. Now, when you mark it, you have to mark it and meet certain engineering criteria with visibility, lighting, all the different signage, that criteria to warn drivers about it. And depending upon the speed of the road and what's in play, you're gonna have engineers that come into play and say, here's what we're gonna do. And they're gonna engineer it according to their best practices. So that's what we rely upon to defend the city if someone's then damaged or hurt. And if we don't have the engineering study, and it was just done arbitrarily because residents wanted it because they see a perceived problem and have a supposed solution, that may not necessarily resolve it, and it creates that problem that we then have to defend.
Several years ago, when developing the pedestrian bicycle plan, it also referenced some federal resources that identify when, based on studies, when and what type of crossing you put in based on the road conditions. You have your ped generator, ped tractor on either side, the type of road, the speeds on the roads, and number of lanes, and that elevates, depending on those conditions, can elevate the crossing from a crosswalk to a refuge island to something else. And so we have those policies in our.
It's the same reason that when people complain about speeding on a road, we do a speed study
Yep.
to make sure
Yep.
before we go put
And
in
you'll-
speed bumps or something.
And you probably recognize 85 percentile in terms of speed, right? In that study.
Exactly. That's exactly why we want that, is to say it was studied and it was done not in an arbitrary manner, but based off of the engineering's best guidance and practice that we'll then use to try to defend the city therein. Now, are we always successful? Unfortunately, no. It's that litigious of a situation where you have catastrophic damages, and the plaintiff can be very sympathetic in those situations. And I can empathize as well. But at the same time, we're also dealing with public monies. And unfortunately, they're going to look to that public money as the deep pocket. And sometimes we may have to pay regardless. You can do, and that's the most frustrating part of my job. And even when I was with the municipality and worked as a risk manager there, is you can do everything right and still have to pay. That's just the system we're in, unfortunately. And you just have to know that that's the business and manage it the best you can.
The reason insurance companies settle claims, even on things that they believe they could win in court,
Yep.
because juries aren't that predictable.
No, juries are
And they
not.
rule against insurance companies typically.
Well, they view insurance as a evil because nobody likes to pay a premium. I remember I was in a car accident right after I graduated college. I got T-boned, and I can't tell you how many people, and I wasn't injured. I was very fortunate. Actually, it worked out well for me because my car was older and I needed a new car, and it was no complaints. But I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, just say whiplash. I call it whipcash now. Just say whiplash, and you'll get $3,000. No, I wasn't hurt. I didn't claim anything. But people don't think twice about inflating those damages when it comes to an insurance company because they're that, nobody likes to pay a premium, and now it's your time to collect. Executive session as well. This is a great tool for you. This is where you can have those frank discussions outside. Again, you work in the proverbial fishbowl. Everything you do is a potential public record that can be disclosed to the general public upon request. At least in executive session, you can have these frank discussions regarding potential litigation, personnel matters, real estate transactions, all the different criteria that arise with your city attorney present in those executive session scenarios. But what's said in executive session needs to stay in executive session. If we go into executive session and I'm giving you an update on litigation that's involved with the city of Lacey, I don't expect the plaintiff attorney now to know my number as to what I think I'm gonna settle at. Actually been there where the plaintiff knew I had $500,000 in authority. How did they know that? I had someone on council that was sympathetic, that was disclosing that to the plaintiff. Well, if I find out that things are getting leaked, guess what? I'm cutting you out. I'm not going to come down and we're not going to give you updates because that's now jeopardizing our ability to settle this amount where we think it's appropriate. So again, these are great tools, but you have to keep it in exec session. Do not disclose things to your spouse. Do not talk about this to your neighbor or your significant other or anybody else because this is a great tool for you. While I was at the City of Auburn, we had a situation where council had to censure a fellow council member. This is where you have to then police each other as well. Because again, elected officials, it's very difficult as to what we can do to effectuate change with elected officials, but that's where you have to have your own policies, procedures, and rules that you have to govern and follow as well. So again, be very careful about that. And written communication, emails, social media, All these things are great communication tools, but they also have implications, either with Open Public Meetings Act, violation of OPMA through string emails that get passed along. Very innocuous, you're not trying to violate it, but when you then pass it on to other people, you may have a quorum now that could. Now, I will say, we do not defend OPMA, Open Public Meetings Act violations, because that is a penalty. It's not a civil tort. And you're not supposed to violate the law. Unfortunately, you can do so without knowingly doing so, and it can create a fine or a penalty. Same thing with public records. Obviously, we're encouraged to keep our books open for the public. If it meets a public record definition, you have to disclose those issues. If you fail to disclose it, we're not going to then indemnify you, because that's kind of against public policy. We're not supposed to indemnify you for breaking the law. So it kind of goes counterintuitive. So we don't indemnify the city for violations of fines and penalties. It's not a civil tort. But this is where your city attorney can come into play as well and be that resource for you, because it can get very complicated. We've had counsel, you have electronic media. I carry two phones with me. I have my personal phone and I have my WCI phone, because I'm a public employee as well. So I'm not conducting business on my personal phone, because if you do so, you subject your phone to potential scrutiny, where it can have to be disclosed and get the metadata on there if there is a public record that somebody is requesting. And be very careful about that, especially your utilization of city resources as well, because like I said, a lot of times, I don't know the city's whole network infrastructure, but where I worked at, you could delete things and it was never deleted. We always kept a record of it because we needed to reproduce that metadata. So you may think you're deleting something, but you're not, and that can come back and be very embarrassing for individuals that are engaging in improper conduct or behavior. So my plea there is just be very careful about that. Use your city resources. Don't use your personal computer at home to conduct city business. You don't want to do that, because you're then subjecting your own hard drive to potential scrutiny and review. You don't want to mix personal business with city business. Social media as well. Be very careful about your utilization of social media and the creation of public forums. And then the exclusion of certain individuals. The last thing you ever want to do is create a public forum where you then have to try to censor somebody, which you can't necessarily do. And now you have some very offensive individuals that could be posting or making comments on a public Facebook page that you're involved in. So be very careful, and I would say talk to your city attorney about your utilization of those as well, because that can get very complicated very quickly. Last thing we ever want to do, and we've had to do this, is pay a very offensive individual money because of a First Amendment violation that they were exposed to.
Can we be held liable, like, if somebody posts something really offensive on the city's Facebook page?
Oh, if somebody posts, there's free speech, but you have to be careful about opening up comments because of that situation.
Well,
You can't necessarily delete. Are you then liable? Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
And I say that today, but tomorrow there could be a new case law that comes back and says maybe. When we get into liability, you always have to look at the specific facts surrounding those situations and what alleged and arose to it. Did the city have no, could they have prevented it? Could they have stopped it? Potentially, I don't know all the facts surrounding that. So most of the time, though, you're not going to be liable for a third party's criminal conduct or misconduct.
Okay.
These
So
are the types
simply,
of conversations we can have, later, get more into the weeds on a topic like this, for sure.
Definitely.
sure, yeah, but just by providing the platform for that to happen,
No, because now councils are getting photo or voice bombed on with very offensive, hopefully it hasn't happened down here. I've been actually at a city doing this presentation and beforehand, open comment, and it was very offensive, people calling in and on that situation. So it's very disturbing what can happen. But you're also creating that public forum that allows for public speech. with that, I'm still not done. Best things you can do. How to control costs. And actually, the city, like I said, City of Lacey, I have zero complaints. You guys are very good. They call WCA, they utilize our resources. We have programs in place to help the staff out. So you guys are doing a great job. I don't have any issues with it, but just in general, I will say, be very careful about things, because just about everything you do could rise to a potential claim. You provide a lot of services. Sometimes the public aren't happy with that. You have roads, you have sidewalks. Sidewalks are a very big deal for us. That's where Public Works, it's one thing to buy something and create something. It's another thing to devote money and resources to maintain that ongoing. So you have those responsibilities to make sure things are done in a reasonably safe manner. So that's where staffing and resources come into play. Luckily, you guys hopefully are not in a budget deficit. I don't know your specific, just about every municipality right now is in some form of a deficit mode, but just be very careful about that, because it's one thing to buy something, it's another thing to properly maintain it for many years to come afterwards as well. Listen to your city attorney, following legal advice and asking for help. That is the best thing council can do. You have a good city attorney here, utilize them and get those resources when needed. State legislature, I kind of mentioned that we've tried to go on the offensive. We have a committee, because we're very committee driven. So we have a legislative committee that we're trying to make some headway with. We have a lobbyist, but they'll listen to our local members better than they will us. But we're trying to make some headway, because honestly, we are in crisis mode. I have one member that was paying over $14 a worker hour.
Jeez.
Just for that's not property. That's just for liability insurance. So every hour they worked, they were paying me $14 a worker hour, not including his salary, wages, and benefits. That's how bad it can get. So again, this is very difficult. It's a lot of moving parts. There's no easy answer when people are harmed and hurt. But unfortunately, they're going to look to you as being that responsible party. So we have to do the best we can to try to mitigate and eliminate people from ever being hurt. Now, WCA actuarially, we have some caps in place, so we try to limit the amount of anyone's assessment can go up any given year. We're reviewing those things. We have analysis. We have a group 5 that's our interlocal agencies that have been capped for a long time. We're now looking at breaking those up to help the impacts, because we don't want good members having to pay for bad members all the time. That's kind of a common thing. People can appreciate, look, I've had to pay a lot of money in claims. My assessment should go up because I've had to pay a lot of money in claims. It's hard for me to say your assessment's going up 25% when you haven't had to pay those claims. So that's where we're looking at what we can do to try to balance that as well. But with sensitivity to losses, you lose the stability. So that's kind of that balancing act that we're always struggling with as an organization. So with that, any other questions I can answer for you while I'm here? I appreciate your time. I appreciate you serving. I know that amount of time it takes and how thankless it can be, because you have a lot on your agendas. I used to have to go to council meetings all the time. My sister-in-law is the mayor actually for Fife. She's been on council now for I think 15 years. So I know the toll it can take. But thank you then for donating your time actually to the city, because obviously we need good elected officials as well. That helps tremendously with us.
Appreciate it. Any questions?
Just a real quick comment. It sounds as if with some caps in place, that would potentially bring some carriers back to the market.
No. Caps are what we put on to our members. It's, if we put caps in on claims, yes, that would. Unfortunately, there are no caps on verdicts right now in the state of Washington. And every time we try to mention that, it gets just shot down. That and joint and several. Those are the two big things that impact Washington state. Joint and several liability, the deep pocket approach, and no tort caps. A lot of states have them, either on state law, not federal. Federal does not have tort caps, but state law claims. Those would be tremendous if we could get those.
Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate
mean,
your time, like I said, so thanks for having me down
It
as
feels
well.
really scary being an elected official, right, after a conversation like this. I know that I've actually, I'm not sure if you've heard about this before, but we had a lawsuit where I, as the mayor, was named personally. I was actually going through a loan process at the time, and my credit score went way
Yes,
down.
because you had a potential
Because I had a
judgment,
potential judgment, and
even though you didn't.
even though I didn't, it took a while, then Dave got it,
Yep.
identified, but there was like a 3-month period in there, my credit score dropped like 100 points or something like that. And it was crazy, and I couldn't go through my loan until
Yeah.
that came off, and so it was not good. It was not a good situation. I'm like, what's going on?
Unfortunately, that happens a lot with police officers as well, just because they have to get named in civil rights litigation. And sometimes they've done nothing wrong, but they're going to have a potential named lawsuit against them. Now, that's where WCI comes in. We indemnify and defend our elected officials and your employees as well.
As long as we're acting within our roles.
Yes,
Yeah.
step outside those rules. That's my scared straight speech. Thank you.
Yeah. I got it, yeah,
In good faith.
yeah,
Always.
yeah, it was
I learned
crazy.
that on a constitutional First Amendment
Thank you.
land use case. I was named personally, but.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj.
Whew. Next up is our public record summary. I know, yeah, can we, take a quick pause? We've been going really straight since 4 o'clock. Can we take a 5-minute pause? It is 7:47, and we're gonna adjourn for 5 minutes, which is, let's see, 8:52.
Seems like four, it's actually five.
7:52.
7:52. So next up is our public records summary.
Great, thank you. So good evening, council. We are here for our annual public records summary, but have a little bit of an extended version as I have our police records supervisor joining for our presentation tonight, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce.
So I'm Anna McBee. It's great to see you or meet some of you for the very first time. As Alyssa said, I am the record supervisor for the police department, and I have been with the department since 2007, so I've been here for a minute.
Yeah, been here for a long time.
Yeah, that's great. So we have two parts to our presentation this evening. So I'm going to go into our first part, which will maybe be familiar to some of you, but new to others. As long as I can get the remote. So we will be going over a general overview this evening to include our legislative requirements and our JLARC reporting. We will be also reviewing our fee schedules and taking a look at our data trends, and then to continue the theme, talk about risk management. So in an effort to make government affairs more open, transparent, and accessible, legislature passed the Public Records Act in 1972. This shares a lot of the same themes as the Open Public Meetings Act, but the Public Records Act specifically requires that all public records be made available to members of the public, with very narrow statutory exemptions available to that effect. The Act further defines a public record to be any writing that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by the agency, and writing is also very broadly defined. So think of any record prepared, owned, used, or retained by the city, and that would very likely qualify as a public record. So requests for public records can be made formally or informally to any employee or elected official. Formally, kind of meaning and capturing the, we have a public records portal available on our website. We can recommend and direct community members to submit their public records requests. But informally, they could also come in to the building department front counter during operation hours and submit a request there as well. That does not mean that they can approach you Sunday morning at Costco as an elected official and submit it, but they can reach out to you in your city-issued emails. So it is crucial that any request for agency records be forwarded to disclosure staff as soon as possible. So that would be Anna McBee over in the police department or myself in the city clerk's office.
Mm-hmm. And, sometimes obviously we get a ton of emails, and it's especially if we've been on vacation or something like that, and so it may take a while to get caught up, and sometimes you just might miss it. I mean, so where is like the line there? If they only reached out to you and you've somehow have missed it, like where?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for extended leave or, planned vacations or anything like that, we do recommend putting automatic responses up, just letting, so that way anybody emailing into your email does receive a response, and that would look very favorable should they make or file a complaint that we missed our 5-day response. So on this time frame, the city has 5 days to respond to a public records request, and that could encompass providing the records, providing an estimated due date on when to release the records, seeking clarification or denial. So really an acknowledgement within that 5 business days. But to that end, yes, sometimes, we do miss it. So making sure automatic responses are up. If it is something that you want to work with the city manager's office to always have an automatic response that thanks, the community to reaching out, and then maybe providing an extra sentence in there on where to go should they be asking for records. That could be something we could look into as well. But
Can you please show us how we add that to our emails?
and to that end too, I do think with city manager office, there's some extra review on your email inboxes for council. So that is being monitored, and anything that is viewed and identified would be forwarded to us as well. So here at the City of Lacey, our most commonly requested records kind of fall into a couple different buckets. So here at the city, The most commonly requested records fall under emails and correspondence, building plans and permits, and then code violations. For the police department, a lot of requests for collision and accident reports, investigation reports, and arrest reports. We also oversee joint animal services. So their most commonly requested records contain complaint and investigation reports as well as adoption records.
Do you know how many public records requests we get for joint animal services?
Roughly around 100 a year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the exact number for 2023,
Is that
but
sort of built into a recoverable cost that we get from?
So as part of the joint animal services budget, we do have a cost for administrative costs for city staff, and that's certainly something we want to revisit in future years, but we do have an established number, so that is for, things like public records, request support, finance support, city manager support, et cetera.
And, okay, I guess we'll have a conversation
It's a
offline.
percentage base, but it may not cover everything we do.
Okay.
so like I mentioned, public records are obviously disclosable under the Public Records Act, but that doesn't mean that everything within the record would be disclosed. So there are sometimes confidential material that can be exempt or redacted before releasing to the public. So when redacting, we must cite the proper authority and provide a detailed explanation of each redaction present. So the most common exemptions here at the city, and again, that encompasses the police department and joint animal services, is driver's license numbers, juvenile records. This comes into play with our police department, but also our parks and recreation programs. Social security numbers, complainant identity, victim and witness identity, and healthcare or medical information. Exemptions can be determined by the record type, where it exists, and the relationship of the requester to the record. For example, my personal residence or my personal contact information may be exempt in my employment file, but if I drive down to Joint Animal Services and adopt a pet, if I fill out that same form, I am no longer a City of Lacey employee, and that record, that information might not be exempt in the same capacity. So in 2017, government agencies that had public records costs exceeding $100,000 must report to the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee, or JLARC, on 18 different public records metrics. That was later amended to 15, which is what we report on still today. So we have successfully submitted our JLARC report for our 2023 data. And that does include police department and joint animal services request data. And some highlights to point out, the total public records requests received for the year was 3,246. 73% of those requests were fulfilled electronically, and 23% of those requests were closed with no responsive records. And 81% of those requests were closed within that 5 business days. The city received 0 claims filed and $0 in litigation costs. So looking at, there's a lot of metrics that go into calculating this, but this is a calculation that our average cost per request is roughly $115. So that's including staff compensation, software, hardware, things really directed at public records. And then our total tracked expenses recovered was 55.
Is that 55 total or per?
Nope, 55 total for the year, yes.
So recovered, no.
Another data point to add is of the 233 agencies that did submit JLARC reports for 2023, the City of Lacey is ranked 40th for the largest volume of records received or records requests received. So to bookend that, the largest volume was 39,000 in a year by a regional 911 dispatch agency. And then the other end was a rural library district where they received 1 for the total year. 39,000.
Could you imagine?
Nope. No. Expanding on the total costs recovered at $55 last year, We are operating under the default charges that are set by statute for us on collecting public records fees. As you can see, there's not a lot here to go with, but for example, 15 cents per page should we need to print records in response to a public records request. And then we have some smaller amounts available for electronic transmittals. So to see an example of this applied, hypothetical request, but again, this is not out of the norm. A request that spanned 9 months for staff to work on and included 6 installments and over 30 hours of focused staff time, which we cannot charge for, and over 453 individual documents provided. Should the requester want to collect all of those records in paper format, we could collect just over $67 or just under $68. Should they want to receive it electronically, which is a lot of how our records are already maintained currently, we would be able to collect $5.63. And then if we were to go by the 10 cents for every gigabyte, we would not be able to collect anything. So unlike fees recovered, penalties under the Public Records Act can have significant impact on the city, but also as employees as well. And I think we kind of highlighted this earlier in presentations this evening. And under the records retention laws, a person can also be found guilty of a felony for willfully and unlawfully destroying public records. So penalties combined with litigation costs have those significant impacts where, so here petitioners do have 1 year statute of limitations from the time a request is closed to file a lawsuit under the Public Records Act. Penalties can range from $0 to $100 per day per record and are usually issued at the judge's discretion. That could result in $100 per day per record for 364 days, which is where those costs continue to climb. These litigation costs are not covered by our agency insurance and would be paid out of the general fund. The example we have highlighted here is a Washington city with a population of just around 37,000 incurred litigation costs in 2020 of $955,000, and then subsequently the next following year, the same city incurred additional costs of $820,000 in litigation for public records. Of all the agencies that support 2 JLARC, over the years, it's been climbing, but for example, in 2018, just over 204 exactly, agencies did report, and then in 2023, 233 agencies submitted their JLARC report, and the total in litigation costs for all of those agencies combined is reflected here. So, and I believe 2023 data was just released, so I don't have it up here, but it was around 6 million. I don't have a speculation, and I'd have to go back to maybe if there was a specific agency that kind of carried a bulk of that. So good news, city litigation. We have not had a complaint filed under the Public Records Act since 2020. In 2020, the city of Lacey was subject to 1 lawsuit under the Public Records Act that involved 3 complaints, and the city did prevail on 2 of the 3. And as you can see here, it was a lower end as far as the penalty, and the bulk of that cost was in attorney fees. And the courts did deem that the city showed no bad faith and that we were properly trained and supervised and had a lot of good remarks regarding. So taking a look at our public disclosure trends, our public records tracking software does allow us to continue to run reports and look at all these different data metrics over the years. And from here, you can see that our total requests have been consistently climbing since 2020. And then we have detailed the total redactions and total staff time as well. And this information really kind of speaks to the increasing complexity and the time that's required. If there are more redactions, it takes more staff time to review, usually a second review, but it also means that the records are very routinely more complex. Data is held within the records that need to be protected, and making sure that we have all the means to do so. So the previous slide, the trends is grayed out here, but looking at our 2024 or a snapshot. So this data reflects January to August 31st, so just past the midpoint of the year. And we are already set to exceed previous year numbers in all three categories. And I was able to look up this information this morning, and we have actually exceeded this in all categories. Total requests being just over 3,300, and total redactions just under 800. We still have a couple weeks to go. So speaking to the complexity, some of the things that factor into that is our data and record sharing over multiple platforms. We have a lot of technology that is really helpful to do the work here at the city, but it also creates a record, which means that we then have to go find it and make sure that we are conducting reasonable searches and producing records when requested. Those records are created quicker than disposition can be applied. We do have state schedules that allow us to destroy records when they meet their retention or their life cycle. We're creating them quicker than we can apply those. Having on-site storage for physical records, this is not the norm, but we still have physical records from historical years that we need to know where they are, what's in them, and make sure that those are indexed or categorized so that when we do get a public records request, we know all search points in order to pull those. Broad requests add an extra layer of complexity. Sensitive and confidential material, making sure that we are doing everything that we can to protect confidential material when it gets included into a record. Dealing with outdated systems that maybe don't talk to the same systems that we have in place now, and having archive solutions and loss of institutional knowledge are all kind of factors in the different complexities that come up. Some of our mitigating efforts, continued record trainings for our primary disclosure staff, but also includes conferences and different trainings and webinars that tie into public records requests specifically, and legal updates and case law as well. Updating our public records training for new employee onboarding. This is kind of in the works and coming close to being finalized, as well as we have updated our public records training for our advisory board members this year, and that was implemented earlier this year so that they get those refresher courses that are required under the OPMA. Continuing to encourage consistent records management best practices agency-wide. I don't recommend that you hold a folder on your desktop that says Alyssa's stuff. It needs to be filed where the rest of the staff and the agency can ultimately recover it if needed. And then continuing to evolve with technology to keep up with our growing demands. And then the clerk's office serves as the city liaison for records retention and disposal processes. And we work with all of our departments to make sure, kind of going back to that records retention piece, that we are disposing of things as they come up for eligibility. So with that, that's part one. Are there any questions? Oh, wow. Yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer. It used to be we were required through the State Attorney General's office to do an annual training on the Open Meetings Act and the Public Records Act. And I don't know where that has gone.
So I do know that there's a required training upon appointed or elected officials, and then every 4 years And some of, what we do here annually does meet those requirements for the refresher training, but there are some onboarding trainings that, for our advisory boards and then elected officials and staff alike that happens.
Typically, it's every time a reelection occurs, that's the 4 years. And so that's where it's re-up. is how-
Okay, and so that's how we keep up with it is, okay.
And then with advisory boards, it's as they're either reappointed or first appointed on, they have to go through that before they.
Councilmember Vasquez?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say kudos to city staff for an incredible record of just complying with the Public Records Act. It's nuanced and it does occasionally get used in ways that I would not consider good faith. And the fact that Lacey has done such an excellent job of being incredibly responsive to all the records requests that come in, that's really, really something to be proud of. So congratulations.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I think Anna has the
Anna?
next stage on body work cameras.
All right, so I'll be talking about the body-worn camera program as it relates to the Public Records Act. So I'll be going over as it relates to law enforcement, public records specifically, discussing fees and then some next steps that we'd like to talk to you about. So why did we implement the body-worn camera program? As you know, that was brought to you guys, to the council to help with transparency, accountability for our officers, for our citizens. It helps to present a clear picture of occurrences out in the city. We've been able to use the body-worn camera for reviewing use of forces or to review in the event of a complaint so that we can get, what happened. We can see a picture of what actually happened. We implemented the body-worn camera program in April 1st, 2023. And there is a pro license that each of our staff, our record staff has that costs $451.56 per year to maintain. And that allows us to apply the redactions to the body-worn cameras and audio as well.
How many of those?
Licenses? 5, 6, 7 licenses, yeah. And that's built into our body-worn camera annual renewal. So talking about specifically public records received by the police department, in 2022, we had 2,068 requests just to the police department. In 2023, we had 2,912, which was about a 40% increase from 2022. And through August 31st of this year, we have had 2,124 requests, which is, obviously on trend to continue to increase. So already, or in August, it was already a 13% increase.
Are those numbers included in the total, or they're not?
Mhm.
They're included in that?
Yeah.
What's the delivery method?
The delivery method for,
Like, would we just email them a video?
so we use, the police department uses Axon for our body-worn cameras, and they provide what they call evidence.com. And so that is the program, an online program that we use to apply the redactions. And then we send a download link to the customers through that.
Files are very large. They would not email.
Yeah, okay.
No, they would not email, no. So our staff responds to the requests in GovQA, and if there's an associated body-worn camera, we notify the requester that they will be receiving a separate email from evidence.com noting that there are either photos or videos.
Do they have a timeline with this link?
I believe they have 30 days to download. So, as of August 31st, there were 67,000 body-worn camera videos created by our police department. So that's the span of just body-worn cameras. That doesn't include our in-car cameras.
Can you hit the mic?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. And this is just a question of semantics. Where does one video stop and another one begin in terms of an 8-hour shift? How many videos are in an 8-hour shift?
Oh, gosh. It depends on the officer's response. So usually the officer will start their video when they arrive on scene. It's not on all day. And so it's usually categorized by either the case number specifically, or if there's no case number pulled, we call a CAD number, a computer-aided dispatch number, or event number. And so that's how we locate the records.
Okay.
So
How long are these kept?
it depends on the nature of the call. So with any kind of retention, there's some accidental recordings that we keep for 90 days. And then there are some recordings that we will keep for the lifetime of the case and beyond. So if something, like Alyssa said, we follow the Washington State retention. So for instance, a homicide would have to be kept for 75 plus years. So as we increase the number of videos that we have, our storage is going to increase exponentially. So that's something that we'll have to consider. So how many requests for body-worn cameras specifically? From April, when we went live, to December 31st of last year, we had 90 individual requests. January 1st to August 31st, we had 178 individual requests. That doesn't mean that's how many videos there were, because videos, there can be one video. Depends on how many officers respond. So you think about a major incident, an officer-involved shooting, a response to a weapons violation. You have all officers on duty responding. So you have every single officer. Sometimes outside agencies respond, and then we also have their body-worn cameras. So
You
it's,
retain those, so you have those actually as well, if there's another department that
if
responds?
if it's an agency assist and they've captured the incident, then yes, we do.
How much, 67,000 videos, right? Like, how much storage is that? How many?
That's a great question, and I don't have that, but I can follow up with you if you really are interested.
Yeah, because if this is just the beginning,
Uh-huh.
right, like, how much storage are we gonna have to buy?
That's an ongoing problem, working with Anna's team and Alyssa's team, as well as our IT department, and trying to make sure we have enough server space. And again, the old days, we're always worried about physical space because it was all paper documents. Now it's server space, and that takes its own cost and parameters to continue to expand and maintain these records.
Yeah, I remember when we when we did the presentation on, looking at purchasing a system, the presenter was talking about, one of your costs, aside from having somebody go or the records keeping portion of it, was the space that you're gonna need to save all these videos. Yeah, and so now we're starting to see the realization of that, and I'm wondering, like, is 67,000 videos, is that like 5 terabytes, or is that like, you know what I mean? So, well, I know we can revisit this later. I'm not expecting an answer from you, but.
Absolutely.
It's something to keep expanding, and also the security of the space, as well as the integrity of the space, because we don't want it to corrupt files or anything like that as well. So it's a challenge we're constantly working with.
Absolutely. And that's why we
I have a
wanted.
question, about the space. Are we currently storing all of these files on-prem, or do we contract with an external cloud server service?
So evidence.com is the one who stores these videos for us. So they're not on-prem.
Okay. So it's not, we're not maintaining the physical devices. We have that contract with them. Okay.
So the storage costs are actually included in the cost of our contract, and it's unlimited. So it's stored by Axon, and it's redundantly stored at Axon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unlimited storage?
Yes, and it's part of our cost of of the current contract.
Yeah. But we still want to make sure that we are diligent in deleting the videos when they do become eligible for deletion. So just to try and.
Because if we still have them, we still have to produce them. And we have to organize every file that we keep so that we can find things that are requested if we still have it.
Absolutely. Yep, you are correct. Okay, so basic PRA requests can be broad and sometimes don't provide, the requesters don't have to provide specific information to request that. However, this RCW does allow or does state that requesters do have to identify either the name of a person involved, the officer, the case number, the incident number, or the date and time of the incident. So they have to be specific about what they're requesting. It doesn't mean that they can't go and say, I want, all the videos from this date to this date, but it's helpful that the RCW has helped us in that manner to be able to drill down on the requests. In addition, there are exemptions and prohibitions with the PRA. Typically, the PRA is an exemption which allows us to redact information, and then there are prohibitions which the statute says we cannot release. So the body-worn camera has very specific text that says, like inside a medical facility, DV victims, their statements will come out. Inside residents, any juveniles, just to name a few, but there are very specific things that we have to remove from the body-worn camera because it has to be taken out.
You have to do that manually, right? You have to watch the video and redact
Frame by
those
frame.
things? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Which leads me to this next one. So this example here is just a screenshot. It's a 3-minute snapshot of a 56-minute and 48-second video. The estimated staff time to redact this was 7 hours. Total objects redacted was 342. And again, that is frame by frame. You were not watching it on 2 times speed. You were watching it by the click of a mouse. And we're talking, I mean, it takes a lot. One recent, sorry, go ahead.
You also keyframe the audio?
Yes.
Do you happen to know how fast AI is helping in some of these instances?
Actually, Axon just came out with some really great updates for us and has helped with that, but it's still not perfect. We still have to go through and watch it, but they have definitely improved their program and have added some features that have definitely helped staff.
I'm sure over time it'll get a lot better.
Yes, they are great at receiving feedback from us, and we provide regular feedback to them to help improve the process so that we can process the requests as quicker. Oops. Back one. So fees. So the PRA allows a city to apply a fee to request, but it doesn't allow to charge for staff time. Obviously, processing body-worn cameras takes longer staff time and very dedicated staff time. The body-worn camera RCW does allow us to apply fees for actual time spent on redacting. And so we want to talk about that. While we can apply fees, there are some requesters that are exempt from paying those fees, and those are individuals that are directly involved with the incident. Their attorney, a person or their attorney who requests body-worn camera relevant to a criminal case involving that person. And then the executive director from either Washington State Commission, African American Affairs, Asian Pacific Affairs, or Hispanic Affairs, or an attorney who represents a person regarding a potential civil cause of action involving a denial of civil rights under, but the attorney must explain the relevancy of the video and the request, in their request for relief from redaction costs. Currently, the city does not apply those fees. We do have to, so let me step back. So currently, agencies that are kind of surrounding us that do apply fees are Olympia Police, Kent Police, Seattle Police. There is documentation, and obviously we would have to go to you, our council, to implement those fees or a fee schedule. And
these fee schedules are specific only to the body-worn camera. It's separate from the DV charges.
Correct.
That we discussed earlier.
And so I'll talk to, so Olympia right now, their fee is 82 cents to $1.16, or $1.16 per minute of redaction. Kent charges 91 cents, and Seattle charges 60 cents per minute, and then a flat rate deposit for, depending on the type of redaction. So they separate their redactions based on whether it's targeted, like a face, a driver's license, or a single item, as opposed to a full screen. So like if it's in someone's residence, it's a little easier to just redact the full screen. Excuse me. So our next steps are to research our fee options and considerations And then we would like to present that eventually to the council to start to be able to apply some of those fees.
Do you have any idea how much so the three that you mentioned that are actually collecting fees, do you have any ideas on how much they're actually getting back? I mean, is it significant? Is it?
So Kent was not able to provide that information, but Olympia noted that, so from 2022, when they went live to 2024, they were able to, only 26% of the requests had applicable fees associated with them, and it was a very limited amount that they were able to get. I mean, nowhere near the staff time that it actually costs, but it's something to, help pay for the programs that they use. So.
Something's better than nothing.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all part of the.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Well, and I'm curious, if we took whatever the cheapest fee is off that list, it sounds like the city of Seattle at like 60 cents. How much would that mean for us in terms of the number of requests we got? That's probably hard math, because if we got 2,100 requests, each of them is a different length of time. So if we're charging by the minute, it might be kind of difficult for us to guess at, unless we had the total number of minutes of video that we actually provided in response to requests. But I'm just curious what the number would look like for us today if we assumed, and this isn't a safe assumption, but if we assume that all of the requests we got would not be exempt from the charge.
Right. So we're looking at doing an actual cost for the redaction, which would mean that we would be able to charge the lowest paid employee their per minute fee. So I believe I think I estimated about 62 cents, and that includes salary and benefits. But it also requires our staff to then use a stopwatch, which they have been doing to try and kind of estimate how long it's taking them, because we do, if we're charging per minute, we have to calculate that. So in the midst of them redacting frame by frame, then they're also monitoring their stopwatch, which, is great time.
So we can't do it like lawyers do it. Just
No,
kind
ma'am.
of ballpark available hours, not like that.
No, ma'am.
Oh, lawyers.
$33.85 if it was 2,100 incidents at 26% at 62 cents.
Okay, well, that's,
So the only thing I'll add to the discussion is that currently we have one full-time employee that does nothing but redact body-worn camera video and in-car video. And then that person's supplemented by everybody else in the record section, which is the other licenses that we discussed, the other 4 people in there, plus Anna supplementing that, plus Hallie, my assistant, supplementing that. That's how much work there is to do. And it's only growing.
And it's going to keep growing.
Yeah, it is going to keep growing because we get more officers, there's more cameras, just in general. And so, yeah, it's something that's one of those things we have to do, and it's good for the public transparency, but it's also one of those things that we don't think about sometimes in terms of our operational expenses that we need to address and plan for.
and how, besides the cost, how's it going so far?
Oh, the program's awesome. I am in deadly fear of my employee who does this full-time. You're literally watching people go through some pretty traumatic events. So there is a lot of, I make sure we're always checking on her mental well-being, as well as everyone who does it. But her particularly, because she does it every single day. That's her entire day. There's also other stuff. We have officers that sway when they stand, and the cameras aren't stabilized. So you can get motion sickness just watching the video.
I do that.
So there's also always unintended consequences and effects. So yeah, the program itself works very great. It's great for identifying training issues. It's great for identifying best evidence, because you get exactly what the person says. You have the best evidence rule. That's why we probably got this, for transparency. So witness statements are perfect. Suspect statements are perfect. Victim statements are perfect. Exactly what you want. But there's cost, time, there's public records requests, there's transcription, there's lots of other costs that kind of go into this for successful prosecutions.
One thing I add to, and this, obviously, we need to try to recoup what costs we can. But another dynamic that we face as well is, as we've seen in the past, there's the First Amendment auditors. And so when we have an incident, that can spike requests from not just local people involved with an incident, it gets from across the country. So I think we dealt with a ton of requests to slash bring because of an incident like that, and people are just using that for internet fodder. So that's another thing to try to think about as we think about fee recovery, is those type of requests as well, versus a defense attorney or somebody involved in a criminal case looking at for evidence.
And can we charge differently based on?
That
We can't charge differently, but to your point, the uninvolved parties we can charge. So there's that.
That would deter any of those,
Yeah,
First Amendment
that could help
auditors, 'cause they weren't
deter some of
involved.
the requests.
Okay, so you can charge if they're not directly involved differently than if they are involved.
Yeah, we if they are involved, we wouldn't be able to charge.
Sure.
Is there an equity aspect that we need to be looking at as we consider these fees as well? Like, somebody who just is dirt poor and can't afford it, but actually needs the records to make something happen.
Well, if they're involved in it, I would feel that they would be in the position to actually need the video. We
Right.
wouldn't charge them.
Right.
So
That's by
something.
statute.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is something to
So
consider.
that solves that really issue. If you're, I guess if you're poor and you're just trying to look at stuff, and, I mean,
Right.
that's a different level, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like we can recoup that much regardless, so,
Right.
Kind of like the other records.
yeah.
I forget what the number was, but it was less than $100.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
We really appreciate, we understand how much work that is. And we tried not to make your work harder, so.
I feel bad for the person who's full-time.
Just one second.
looking at this.
Did you guys get the direction you needed moving forward?
Yeah, do you need any direction?
Bring the fees back, is that what you're asking?
Well,
The analysis? Just want to make sure that we got direction from council to continue with the analysis to,
Fees.
yes.
Oh, yes.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
And of course, this
Everyone's-
will also be part of as we go into January too, and talking about financial strategies along with everything else in the retreat. That's all going to be part of the piece.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
So our last agenda item is we're near the end of the year. Next year, we're gonna, start a new year. Historically, if you've been assigned to a committee 1 year, you sort of hold on to it for the 2-year term. However, if there is, as you've gone through this year, if there is anything that you want to bring up where this isn't working for me any longer, or I'm really interested in something else, we'll bring that back early on in January for discussion. This is just a heads up right now. If we need a change for some reason, we'll do that at the beginning of January. If I don't hear from you, then we'll continue the same. I also want to make an announcement that we have a card for Commissioner Edwards in the workroom, and hopefully we can get that signed by all the council members as soon as possible. And because his retirement party is next Tuesday, so I will.
For council.
4 to
Yeah,
6.
4 to 6, so
Atrium.
hopefully I'll be there right at 4 and be around until we have to leave for our council meeting, but we need it done before that, obviously. And with that, to go to the orders, or anything else, anyone else wants to? Oh, Councilmember Dunny.
Obviously, we had, a good talk today about liability and things that we should say and things that we shouldn't say. And you guys also know that I am big on elected officials and accountability. I think that's something I take very serious. And there's an issue which I wanted to bring up that I think is something that we should discuss, not necessarily now, but maybe at the next work session. I wanted to wait until the county's report was fully complete with the investigation that went on into Commissioner Klaus. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because that is our district, District 5. It's the majority of the people who voted for us. But I really want to keep my comments to strictly what was in the investigation and the official comments as a result of that. The investigation showed that there was a breach in trust and violation of ethics that would have resulted in the termination of a regular employee. I think it's upon all of us to go read that investigation for ourselves, and I think it at least deserves a conversation between all of us on a vote of no confidence in Commissioner Klaus. Now it's on each one of us to make the decision whether that's warranted, but I think it at least deserves a conversation because it is our it is the trust in the public and the confidence in the public that if we don't at least address ethical considerations when they do occur, that it looks like we don't care. And I at least want the public to know that this is something that our council and our city takes serious. So with that, I would just request that it is brought up and discussed for that consideration at a future time moving forward. So if anyone has any questions on that or thoughts, then I would fully entertain them.
I think we need to be very, very careful about something like that. Imagine if it were flipped and it were one of us, and the county commission could say, well, you know, we have the whole county, so they're in our jurisdiction, and we're going to condemn that council member. I just think we're asking for trouble.
And I would fully support if any one of us did something strictly what is in that investigation, that we should at least have that conversation as well. Because there's serious allegations. And like I said, if you've read the investigation, that should tell you everything that you need to know. So anytime that one of us, you know, does something that should be held accountable, I think at least the conversation should be brought up. And then we determine to take action.
I need to see if there's a majority of the council who wants to discuss this at a future meeting. Obviously, it takes 4 votes to do anything, right? And so, is there a majority of this council who wishes to address this at a future council meeting or not?
So what you're asking is to have the conversation?
To have the conversation.
But not necessarily publish an opinion.
That would be a decision we'd make in that conversation.
That would be a decision we'd make in that conversation, but
I'm open to the conversation.
I'd say no.
I'm in a weird, position here because I was in that election for District 5.
yeah,
And
it's, no, there's nothing to do with
This is not political
to do with what
at
was
all.
done in office,
This
not
is
the
nothing
election.
political.
I don't know, I'd go with the majority of the council.
Well, Councilmember Vasquez?
I share Carolyn's concerns about sort of taking it upon us to judge or, I don't know, discuss the appropriate ethical actions of somebody in a different jurisdiction, even though that district overlaps with Lacey. I think we all can have our personal opinions about the content of the investigative report that was published and what has happened, but it does make me a little nervous from a risk mitigation perspective if Lacey brings that up as a topic on a city agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and, the findings, there's nothing she can be charged with, including harassment of the employee. She's being reinstated to all her committee assignments. And while her fellow commissioners did do kind of a condemnation of her behavior. That's it. I mean, and they did say admittedly that if she were an employee rather than an elected official, her behavior would have constituted grounds for dismissal, but she's not. And I'm not defending her actions. I think her judgment was lacking, but I really have a hard time having a legislative body, policymaking body like this, passing judgment on somebody from another jurisdiction, even though we have a jurisdictional relationship.
Counselor?
I would just add one thing. I mean, the remedy for the situation, if the public feels the need to remedy the situation, lies with the public. The public has the ability to do a recall election if they feel it's necessary, and that resides with the public, not with any elected body. And I'll leave it at that.
So I understand where you're coming from, Councilmember Dunning, but I've been very clear, as long as I've been the mayor, that I completely discourage this council getting involved in a political situation. And there's no doubt about this, that this is, from your political viewpoint, you think something should be done. There would be other people who disagree with that. And so what that tells me is, yes, this is a political decision that you would want to remedy by giving no confidence. That's politics, right? You want this body to send a message, and it's a political message, because there's no actual remedy we have, and that's been made perfectly clear. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for councils to be involved one way or the other. There are other remedies, right? And it's when it comes to elected officials, and that remedy is the ballot box, or in some cases, a recall. And I believe we have to leave it up to the people in those circumstances to be passing that decision. So I'm not in favor of it. I understand where you're coming from, and I respect your opinion, but I'm not going to be a hypocrite on this. I stand by this. I don't care what side you're on. I don't think it's appropriate for the council to be involved in a political decision.
And I just want to, I understand your use of the word political, which is this is not a political left and right thing. This is a, do we trust in the person to do their job? And this is even satisfying having this conversation, because like I said, I think not just ignoring it, pretending like it didn't exist to the voters that we aren't paying attention, says something. So I think it's important that at least is talked about and brought up, and I respect where everybody stands on that. It was just important to me that this subject was at least approached.
And that's your total prerogative as an independent elected official, as long as we're not opening ourselves up to liability, which is, I'm glad you spoke to our city attorney first before bringing this up. But I don't necessarily see a majority of council wishing to go forward on this, because I don't, and nope. Okay, there's not 4 votes. Okay. Yep. Now we've reached the end of our agenda, so without objection, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned. And as always, you keep it classy, Lacey.